Well, good morning, everyone. And my name is Joyce Adams, and I am very blessed to be here to share the word with you this morning. But after Donna's prayer this morning, we could really just pack up and go home because she prayed a lot about what I want to share today. So thank you, Donna. I work in mental health. So in John's teaching this morning, he started out talking about the spiritual warfare, how the spiritual warfare began back in the garden. And it has continued throughout time. The book of Ecclesiastes tells us that there is nothing new under the sun. So the things that the challenges that we face today is probably just a recycling of things that have happened in the past. And so, but being the intelligent people that we are, we do not recognize often in this world that this is a spiritual battle. And so we therefore have to give names and titles to a lot of things that are occurring. The two newest diagnoses that I'm aware of working in mental health are pandemic fatigue and election fatigue. And so, and people are using those diagnoses to help explain away some of their feelings and some of the things that they do. I looked at a chart at one of my meetings the other day, and it talked about 3 different categories that we choose to live in when we are facing stress or anxiety. One is called the fear zone. And in the fear zone, people have a tendency to base their life on emotions, and especially on the emotion of fear. And it's kind of like the Chicken Little syndrome, where the sky is falling. You know, I complain all the time and I get mad really easily. So you can see that transpiring some in the world that we're living in today. The next area they talk about is called the learning zone. And in the learning zone, my brain is functioning a little bit better. I can make some decisions like to stop consuming some of the things that are hurting me. I've heard people say that they had to give up CNN because they were watching CNN nonstop, or different things that they had to do to change the style of their life. And then they start to ask questions as well about the situations that they're living in and think about the way that they're acting. And then they also in that zone start to think about giving up the things that they have no control over. But the zone that I like is called the growth zone. And it just hits so many of the key points that of the places where God wants us to live. And one is that I think of others and think of ways that I can help them. Another thing is that I live in the present, but focus on the future. How often do we hear that, even though we're living in this day and time, we need to keep our eyes glued upon the hope. And that's what helps us to persevere. We've been talking a lot about using our gifts, abilities, and talents, our placement in the body. So another place is to make our talents available to those people that may need them, and to keep a positive emotional state and spread hope and look for ways to adapt. So in light of those things, somebody just popped up from the scriptures for me, and I wanted to take a closer look at her life. And don't talk about her very often. I don't know how many people are familiar with Jehosheba. Jehosheba from the Old Testament. There are a couple of records about her in the book in 2 Kings and also in Chronicles. And if you want to talk about somebody that had to face, first of all, quarantine fatigue, I would call it, and also would look at election fatigue, because in the time that she was living, if you wanted to change administrations, what you did was kill off the current administration. And so those are some of the things that we're going to look at with her. So And once again, I mean, I just want to point out that God has always had a plan for our redemption. And in the spiritual warfare that we engage in, the adversary, following the fall, his goal at that time was to wipe out the Christ line. And as time progressed and God started to narrow in on where the Messiah would come from, he determined that, or he shared that the Messiah would come from the line of David. So I'm going to take a look at a record in 2 Kings, and I think we're going to go to 2 Kings chapter 2 Kings chapter 11. And, you know, I always think I have these things set up so well, and then I struggle. So in chapter Kings, 2 Kings chapter 11, in verse 1. It starts with, now when Athaliah, I'm going to start right there, was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. So if that gives you any idea of what her life might have been like, she was not really a nice person. She was not a good person at all. So, and she married a king of Judah. She was from the line of Israel, but she married someone in the line of Judah as part of a treaty to try to join the Israel and Judah together again. And the person and the parents that groomed her life were Ahab and Jezebel. So, and they were pretty evil. So she married the king of Judah, and they had some children. And it says, once again in verse 1, now when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw her son was dead, she rose to destroy all the royal seed. So what happened was her husband died during the course of time, and their son Ahaziah took over the throne in Judah. And of course, there's a record that says she taught her son how to do evil. And, you know, if you're a parent, can you imagine just teaching your children how to live the most evil life possible? So when her husband, first of all, took over his throne, he wanted to make sure that nobody usurped his power. So he killed off all his brothers so that none of them would try to kill off him and take control of the throne. So Athaliah, and when her husband died, her son took over, and people weren't really happy with him. And so he didn't die a very nice death. If you look at verse 2, it says, but Jehosheba, the daughter of the king of Joram, daughter of Asahiah, and took Joash, the son of Asahiah, and he and his nurse, and stole them away from the king's sons who were slain, but put them in a bedroom, and they hid from Athaliah so that he was not slain. What happened when her son died? Athaliah decided that she was going to become the queen of Judah. And she's the only queen that we talk about in the history of Judah. She's the only one that there was. But in order for her to be the heir apparent to the throne, one of the things that she had to do was to kill all of her grandchildren. So she decided she was going to kill all of her grandchildren. And this is where Jehosheba comes in, because she now has to make a decision. What is she going to do? She knew the promises of God. She knew that God promised the Messiah would come through the lineage of David. And so she had a choice to make. So it says that she went and took Joash, one of Azariah's sons, and she took his nurse and stole them away from the king's sons who were slain and put them in a bedroom, and they hid him from Athaliah so that he was not slain. So the place that they took him to hide, because Jehosheba was married to the high priest in Judah. And Athaliah really wasn't into God, and she wasn't into worship in the temple. She actually helped bring Baal worship into the kingdom. So Jehosheba took Joash and hid him in the temple, and because there was no likelihood that Athaliah was going to go there to hang out or see what was going on. So they hid him there. And I was just thinking, in a time where that you're a member of the royal family, that you're living under wicked reigns, that people will chop off your head, that they will kill you without a second thought, that would be a little bit of election fatigue. And then to take a child and decide that you're going to hide him away in quarantine and it turns out that they're going to be there for 6 years hiding out, that could be a little bit of a challenge. And depending on how you viewed that would determine what you would be able to do. But Jehosheba kept her eye on the future, on the promises of God. She knew that God said that there would be a Messiah that would come through the line of David. So she made the determination that she was going to intervene and do something that would save the line of David. So we have a lot to be thankful for her. And I think she's only mentioned maybe 3 or 4 times in the Bible in these records. So, Athaliah was really pretty happy. She took over the throne. She was living a pretty great life in her eyes, and she didn't have anybody to compete with her. So we're going to continue reading in this record in verse 4. In verse 4. And it says, in the 7th year, Jehodiah, who was her husband and the high priest, sent and brought the captains over hundreds of the Carites and the guard and brought them to him into the house of Yahweh, and he cut a covenant with them. So this is her husband, the high priest. And so Joash has been hiding out in the temple for 6 years. And I want you to think about, especially if you're a parent and you've raised young children, how do you keep a child between the ages of 2 and 7 quiet and entertained, and make sure they get the sunlight and the physical activity that they need? How do you do that for 6 years? And, a lot of us have been in quarantine or locked down in our houses for 6 or 7 months. And you can go a little stir crazy. So think about a 6-year-old that really has to stay undercover for 6 years. And so it says here that Jehoiada cut a covenant with the guards. So what they had to do at this point, the 6 years are up. They're going to make a plan to bring Joash out of hiding and to set him on the throne where he needs to be set upon the throne. And so, Athaliah has been running the country pretty well all this time in her mind's eye. And so the guards are probably with her. She's got a lot of people that are in league with her. So now the high priest is going to have to do something, and Jehosheba is going to have to do something so that the rightful heir to the throne can come forward. And so it says that he cuts a deal with these Karaites. And to the best of my understanding, those are soldiers for hire. They're mercenaries. And so, and there's many of them from this line used to provide protection and even be bodyguards from David, and it had descended on down the line. So he's going to, the high priest and his wife are going to have to cut a deal. It says in verse 4, in the 7th year, Jehoiada sent and brought the captains over hundreds of the Karaites and of the guard and brought them to him into the house of Yahweh. And he cut a covenant with them and took an oath from them in the house of Yahweh and showed them the king's son. So this is the first time that somebody's going to actually be aware, besides Jehosheba and her husband, that Joash is alive. And he, the high priest, commanded them, saying, this is the thing that you are to do. A third part of you, those who come on the Sabbath and keep watch over the king's house, a third part are to be at the gate of Sur, and a third part at the gate behind the guards, and are to keep watch of the house for defense. The 2 companies of you, all who go off duty on the Sabbath, are to keep watch over the house of Yahweh on behalf of the king. So they're really trying to set up protection, but Athaliah is not one that frequents the temple. So, but they've got a plan. They're planning for all contingencies. In verse 8, it says, you must surround the king being Joash, the 7-year-old. Every man with his weapons in his hand, he who comes inside the ranks is to be slain. Be with the king when he goes out and when he comes in. And the captains over hundreds did according to all that Jedediah the priest commanded. And each one of them took his men, those who were to go on duty on the Sabbath, with those who were off duty on the Sabbath, and came to Jehoiada the priest. The priest gave to the captains over hundreds the spears and shields that had been King David's, which were in the house of Yahweh. The guard stood, every man with his weapon, from the right side of the house to the left side of the house, around the altar and around the house on behalf of the king. Then he brought out the king's son and put a crown on him and gave him the testimony. And they made him king and anointed him and clapped their hands and said, long live the king. Now, don't know where Athaliah had been hanging out where all this was going on, but now she starts to be aware that something is going on that she might not like. So in verse 13, it says, when Athaliah heard the noise of the guard and of the people, she went to the people into the house of Yahweh. So this is probably the first time she's been in the temple, maybe in her entire time in Judah. And she looked, and behold, the king stood by a pillar, as the tradition was, and the captains and the trumpeters by the king. And all the people of the land rejoiced and blew trumpets. Then Athaliah tore her clothes and cried out, treason, treason. So she's decided that she has been mistreated, that she has been done wrong. Even though she killed up everybody that she thought was an heir to the throne, she thinks it's treason, because she missed killing one of them. So now that, this is one of the reasons they wanted to make sure that there was a real protection for Joash, the king. It says that Jehoiada, the priest, commanded the captains and hundreds who were set over the army and said, bring her out between the ranks and put to death by the sword anyone who follows. So they're now determined that she's got to go, and anybody that's working with her has to go as well. For the priest said, let her not be put to death in the house of Yahweh. So they laid hands on her, and she went by the way that the horses enter into the king's house, and she was put to death there. And I don't know if you remember much about Jezebel, but she died kind of in the same place that Jezebel, her mother, or that she died. Then it says Jehoiada made some reforms. This is now that Athaliah is out of the picture, that the king, the rightful king, is on the throne. There's a possibility that the Christ line will continue. The high priest decides he's going to do something else. It says, then Jehoiada cut a covenant between Yahweh and the king and the people, that they should be Yahweh's people, and a covenant between the king and the people. Then all the people of the land went to the house of Baal and broke it down. And once again, Athaliah had introduced Baal worship into the country. So now they're going and they're going to destroy the altars that she had built. So then all the people of the land went to the house of Baal, broke it down. His altars, his images, they completely broke into pieces. And they killed Mattan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. And Jehoiada, the priest, appointed officers over the house of Yahweh. He took captains over hundreds, and the Carites, and the guard, and all the people of the land. And they brought the king down from the house of Yahweh, and came by the way of the gate to guard the king's house. And so he sat on the throne of kings. So all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet now that they had killed Athaliah with the sword at the king's house. And Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign. So once again, the path is set up so that we can have the Messiah come through the line of David. And it just shows a lot of bravery and courage on the behalf of Jehosheba, because she could have chosen not to engage. She could have decided to take any other path, but she set the thing that she knew God would have her to do in front of her, and she followed that path. And so for us, I mean, I think that it's just a tremendous example that no matter what is going on around us, that we can remain aware that we are in a spiritual warfare, but that the Lord has already determined that the final battle is his and that we will win. And so instead of looking at all the things that are not going the way that we want them to, we need to look at the final goal that God has set before us. So I would like to close out in the book of Philippians. And in Philippians chapter 3, verse 10, it says that my goal is to know him, to experience the power of his resurrection and the sharing of his sufferings, being conformed to his death. And so in some way, I will arrive at the resurrection out from among the dead. Verse 12, not that I have obtained it or have already reached the goal, but I press on to take hold of that for which also Christ Jesus took hold of me. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself as having taken hold of it, but one thing I do, letting go of the things that are behind and reaching forward to the things that are before. I press on toward the goal in order to win the prize of the upward calling of God in connection with Christ Jesus. So then, as many of us are mature, must think this way, and if you think differently about anything, God will reveal that to you. So my encouragement for us today, just as it was with Jehosheba, is to live in the present world with a focus to the future and the promises, and as John was sharing this morning, the crowns of reward that God has in store for us as we keep our eyes on the hope. And that was what I'd like